Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. We talk a lot about horror on this channel, but the real horror out there is how easy it is for your data to fall in the hands of disreputable people. That's why today's video is sponsored by Aura. While you're enjoying today's spooky video, data brokers, those things that go bump on the web, could already be selling your information to scanners, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, your health records, your relatives, they could all be out there. That's why I've been using Aura. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests, just for me. It was simple to use and very intuitive, and I had barely gotten out of the setup process, and it was already blocking over 20 data broker requests on my behalf. Aura protects your passwords, your banking information, everything you need for day-to-day online life. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it also protects me from hackers who could use my information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, other sensitive information. Things like a certain YouTube channel that you all enjoy listening to so much. Aura also does much more to protect me and my family from online threats, the kind you can't see. It comes with other features like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more, without having to download several different apps. It really is just that easy to set up, and best of all, I get everything at one affordable price. I hear you saying, but Dr. Plague, I have one or two of these tools already. But, dear readers, not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Readers of my fine tales can tell you why that never ends well. Aura is always on, doing the hard work of keeping me safe so I can focus on other tasks like finishing my latest book or uploading my most recent video. I value my privacy, and I know you value yours. You can go to Aura.com, that's AURA.com, to start your 2-week free trial. You can also check out the link below and start your free trial with Aura. So why not give Aura a try and protect yourself from the real monsters out there? I work as a part-time contractor, specializing in flooring. It's good, fulfilling work for the most part. I learned the trade from my cousin, and it supplements my day trading income. I've been doing it for a few years now, and while I enjoy it, I'm sure my work stories would bore the average person. That was until a few months ago. I had a job just on the outskirts of town, a large but pretty old house that had recently been bought by new owners that wanted to renovate the basement, which had never been fully finished by the previous guy who owned it. We had been working for a while, and things were going pretty normally. We were working to remove the previously decrepit flooring. I was chiseling in the far corner of the room when suddenly the ground under me just kind of collapsed. Before I even knew what was happening, I was splayed out in the dark, pain screeching across my body as my head pounded. I was covered in debris and laid out stunned, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. One of the other contractors peered over the edge at me, asking if I was all right. He was roughly 3 feet above me, looking down into the hole. I slowly sat up, and while I was pretty torn up, I wasn't seriously injured or anything. I told him I was all right and had a look around. I noticed I was in some kind of tunnel. To my right and left, the dirt path drifted off into the darkness. After I'd been pulled out and cleaned up a little, I told the other workers what I had seen. As far as we knew from the blueprints of the house, there was no underground chambers or anything under the basement we should have been aware of, other than the usual plumbing and electrical stuff. We halted the job and contacted the previous owner, who knew nothing about any tunnels below the house. We filed a report with the city, given that we were literally out of our depth and had no idea how to approach a situation. They told us they'd investigate, and for the time being, we weren't to continue work on the property. A few days later, we were contacted and told that because of the danger of the site, the new owners had been compensated, and the city had taken ownership of the property and condemned it. We were paid for our work, plus a little extra for the trouble, and that was that. The other guys were content, but I have to admit my curiosity was piqued. Like I said, this field isn't exactly known for excitement outside of the industry, but nothing like this had ever happened to me or anyone else I knew. I mean, secret underground tunnels. That's the stuff that a good mystery's made out of. I decided to talk about it to the local paper, and at the very least, I thought it could give me a minute or two in the spotlight. Who doesn't want to be on the news, right? I met with one of the journalists and told my story. She grabbed some pictures of my scabs and told me I was almost guaranteed to be featured. It's a small town, and not much happens around here. I figured I'd at least get a blurb on their online publication or something. Instead, the next day I got an email from them saying that unfortunately they had to reject my submission. I was a little stung, honestly, but I didn't take it too harshly. Not like it was going to be life-changing or anything like that. It wasn't a half hour later that I received a knock on my door. I opened the door to a short but well-built man. He was wearing a fairly plain button-up, a jacket, and some jeans, nothing out of the ordinary. He asked if he could come in, and he said he was from the city. I agreed, and we went and sat in my living room. I'll make this short. I don't want to waste your time. The city is asking you to keep the incident at the property in Hillside to yourself. We're investigating things thoroughly, and we do not want to cause any alarm to residents or attract any vandals or urban explorers. I was taken aback, since while I was curious, I didn't think it was as big a deal as all that. I agreed nonetheless, not wanting any real trouble. I did let him know that I'd contacted the local paper, but they rejected my story anyway. "We know," he said, and his cordial demeanor turned suddenly grim. He stood up and turned ever so slightly so I could get a look at the holstered gun on his hip. "Don't do that again. Are we clear?" My blood ran cold, and I affirmed that we were. He nodded and told me to have a good day before he left. I was stunned. I didn't know what the hell had just happened. As I was reasoning through things, I figured no legitimate city personnel would threaten me with a gun. I mean, he wasn't a cop, but who would care so much about this, or even know about it? How did they know I was talking to a journalist? Over the next few days, it ate me up. Apparently the other guys had similar experiences with someone from the city, though not as drastic as mine. Most of them figured we had run into something we shouldn't have, and we should just leave it alone. One, though, Raphael, seemed even more interested than I was. I'd worked with him on a few projects before, and he was a little quirky, to say the least. He called me privately and proposed that we investigate the site ourselves. I turned him down. After all, someone had enough interest in the situation to follow me and flash me his gun, supposedly on behalf of the city. Raph said that he would go with or without somebody, but I told him even if I wanted to go with him, there was no way we could go back into it. The house, I'm sure, was being watched, and city workers were taking care of the tunnels. Wasn't like we were equipped to go excavating all over the area the house was on. He dropped in for a while, confronting me with sound logic. It was only a few days later that he sent me a picture of an open hole taken at some hill. "Found this kind of close. Going to investigate. Text you when I'm out," the message read. A pit grew in my stomach. Surely whatever was going on was far above our heads, and he was taking a big risk being nosy. I figured he'd get caught, and I'd get another visit asking if I knew about what he was doing. Part of me also worried that he would get physically hurt, though, or even lost. What if they sealed him up in there? Or what if a tunnel collapsed? My fear grew over the next few days as I didn't hear anything from him. I began to worry more and more, and I thought about calling the police, but there was that curiosity creeping back in. Morbid, gnawing curiosity. Strange sense that the police in this situation would not be my friends. I figured I should at least find the spot he went to. to let the authorities know. Early the next morning, I drove out to the area. There were quite a few hiking trails, so I gathered and started on one of those as I made my way around until I found the hole. My heart dropped when I saw his car parked in one of the lots, with 3 tickets piled mindlessly on the windshield. I started on the closest path, trying to find the spot he had sent a picture from. It was clear from his photo that he'd gone off trail, but I was hoping to at least get an idea of where exactly he'd headed. After roughly 20 minutes of wandering around, I saw a hill that looked like it could be it in the distance. I made for it as quickly as possible, sweating up a storm. I cursed the fact that I'd only brought a single bottle of water as I slammed it down my dry throat. Eventually, I reached the hill and began to circle it. It didn't take me long to find the hole. I froze at its entrance, staring down at it. It was roughly the height of the chamber that I'd landed in when I originally had my accident. Call the police, I told myself, but I didn't. The gaping maw in front of me seemed to pull me in. Why I climbed in, I couldn't tell you. Fear for Raph, knowing a minute wasted could be the difference between life and death. Fear of what would happen to me if the authorities got involved. And a rational desire to uncover the truth all by myself. Whatever the reason, I climbed in and started down the slowly dropping shaft. I hadn't prepared at all. I had my phone flashlight, which poorly illuminated the chamber. I slowly inched my way down, stopping every now and again to listen for anything. All I could hear was my own breathing. I continued before calling out, "Raph, it's me! Raph, you down here?" No reply. I knew this had to be a long tunnel, impossibly long. The house was a solid 3-minute drive from the recreational area. That might not sound like much, but when you're crawling in a tunnel, it sure as hell is. I resolved that if I didn't find any trace of him in the next few minutes, I would turn around and bite the bullet with the cops. Not long after that, I saw an opening in the wall. It was another tunnel, shooting down left. Right next to the new hole, I saw something etched in the dirt, a crude arrow pointing up, and some letters next to it. They were pretty hard to read, and I pressed my face and phone light real close. The scrawlings were faint and jagged, but this is what I could make out. In something ST1 something. I pondered for a second on what it might mean. Was it graffiti? I hadn't even noticed something was now in the opening. A rat's face peeking out of the darkness. I jumped back and yelped, slamming into the chamber wall. I caught my breath. I've seen a few rats in my day, and I've never really been scared of them. I shined the light at it, ready to tell it to go away. My stomach dropped, and my adrenaline flooded my body a second time. It wasn't a rat. It was rat-like, covered in fur and whiskers, with huge ears and a protruding snout. But it was nearly man-sized. It wore a ragged vest and tattered camo pants. In one hand it held a rusted revolver, pointed straight at me. Between its teeth, it clenched a long blade. I said nothing. I was paralyzed with fear, but its free hand had begun to motion me to come closer, and it turned to point down the chamber. I saw a long, fleshy tail below its legs as it shifted. It pulled the knife from its mouth and began to speak at me. It was at once guttural and squeaky, but it was clearly English. "Come, I bring you to Major." I began to stammer, protesting and putting my hands up, my phone light clattering to the ground and shining up. No, I'm sorry, I'll leave, please." As I pleaded, it began to inch towards me, nostrils flaring. In retrospect, it must have wanted me alive. Otherwise, it would have just shot me. I heard something coming down the way I had come. Glancing, I saw another shape inching towards me. I thought it might be a second one of them. Suddenly, a bright beam of light flooded the chamber, and I shielded my eyes. The creature let out a terrible shriek, and I could hear the sound of scurrying. A deafening boom followed a gunshot, which my ears had yet to recover from. I felt hands grab me and pull me back up the tunnel a ways. I looked up and saw it was a human man. He let go of me for a second, and with great speed, he withdrew, primed, and threw a canister down the tunnel, which started spewing some sort of gas. Instantly my eyes began to sting, and he screamed at me to follow him out, roughly pulling me forward. I crawled blindly after him, repeatedly scraping myself and hitting my head in a panic. Eventually we burst out of the tunnel and into the sun. I laid sprawled on the ground, everything in pain. My eyes, my ears, my lungs, my hands, my knees. They were all searing. Through blurred eyes, I saw the man intently looking down the chamber, a pistol of his own pointed down. I recognized him as the man from the city that had threatened me at the start of all this. After what seemed like forever, he put the gun away and came to me. He asked if I was injured, and I shook my head. He helped me up, and we walked a ways from the opening, but also away from the trail. He sat me down and began to yell. "I thought I was clear that you were going to drop it," he said, burying his face in his hands. "I messed up. I should have trailed you longer. I thought you were done with this." I said nothing, and he turned to me with an intense look on his face. "Why were you out here? And who knew you were here?" My friend, my work buddy, Raph, he went down there. I hadn't heard from him. He worked with me at the job." His face went pale. "He went down there?" I thought that guy was going to be less problematic. This is bad. This is really bad. He took a deep breath, and after a moment of collecting himself, he spoke. "Forget about him. Forget you ever knew him. No, to hell with that. I'm already screwed. My superiors are going to crucify me. I'll tell you this. Forget everything. Your job, your apartment, anything you have here. Get the hell out of the country, and don't tell anyone where you're going, because I'm sure I'll have to testify. Don't ever speak of what you saw. I'm not saying this to cover my ass. I'm as good as dead, but if you want any chance of having a normal life after this, go somewhere quiet, start fresh, leave this all behind you, and do it quick." He stopped talking and pulled out a radio. He fiercely pointed towards the trail, and I didn't hesitate. I went all the way back, hopping into my car, and drove straight home. I sat for a while, stunned, before slowly grabbing some important things. My cousin Dave had a place down in Mexico, a majority of the year. Although I lost my personal phone, I still had my work phone, and I got a hold of him. I didn't tell him much, just that I was in trouble, and I needed to get down there as quickly as possible to figure out my situation. After he verified that I hadn't killed anyone or anything like that, he agreed to help me make arrangements to get out of here. I won't go into much detail, but I more or less fled without a word, taking only money and my passport, alongside some clothes and stuff. I eventually got down to his place, a quiet little spot in a small resort town. He put me up for a while and also helped me make a game plan for my next move. Of course, he wanted to hear what happened. I told him everything over a couple of drinks. When I finished, he swished the glass for a second, thinking hard. "You remember my dad, right?" he eventually asked. I nodded. I hadn't known my uncle too well, and he had a reputation in the family for being kind of a kook and a recluse. He'd been in the Army during the Vietnam War, being dishonorably discharged, got into a lot of conspiracy nonsense, and ended up being divorced by my aunt when I was young. He more or less disappeared after that. Really never saw his kids or anyone else in the family. You see, my dad, most of the stuff he got into was crackpot garbage, but there was one thing he always raved about that he swore he had personally seen evidence of. You know, the abandoned factory outside the city. Everyone in the area did. It was no secret for locals that in the 60s, the U.S. Army had requisitioned the facility as a testing ground for demolitions, and after the Vietnam War, they packed up and left it abandoned. My uncle had been a desk jockey at the facility and was discharged for mentally unstable behavior. Dad was convinced that there was more than demolition going on out there when he was in the Army. He claimed that he did some snooping around and discovered that the demolition thing was a cover-up for secret projects. He took a deep breath and laughed, a little shaky in his face. This is going to sound silly. Actually, no, it's not. Not after what you told me. He thought they were trying to breed some kind of super soldier there to use in Nam. He was part of logistics and said they were always discreetly bringing in all kinds of lab equipment alongside the normal stuff. There was one shipment he caught a glimpse of, and he said there was a bunch of pet supplies for rats. He got this idea that the army was attempting to splice rodent DNA into troops. You know, because of all the Viet Cong tunnel systems and the tunnel rats. He thought they were trying to take it a step further, literally making soldiers with rat DNA to infiltrate the tunnels. The story was that when he tried to bring things up, they dismissed him, till he attempted to expose things himself and got himself caught and discharged on a faulty psychological ground. Given how he was, we always figured he was kind of crazy, and that they were probably in the right. We both sat in silence for a little while, and I strangely started to laugh. Guess he wasn't so crazy after all, then. Once I got set up, things were okay for a while. I found ways to apply my skill set to my new area and work jobs to get by. No government men came after me, and I had more or less made it out, free and clear. Why am I posting then? Well, I'm not sure. Just like my decision to enter the tunnels, it's undercut by that lingering sense of curiosity. I can't say I want to be found, but I almost do. It's lonely, and I've got no one to share this experience with out here. I'm wondering what all ended up happening. My life is kind of dead end now, working just to pay for the basics. How do you go back to normalcy after something like that? I'm sure this will end up across somebody's radar. I don't know if I'll end up with a bullet in my head in the middle of the night, or me taken to some kind of secret interrogation facility or what, but I feel compelled to share, and I accept whatever fate is coming my way. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstead and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Psycat, Rhonda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Zeronin, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Sarah SMR42, Grim Reaper, and Tomboy Top Uwu for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a special thanks to Grim Reaper, who appears to have subscribed not just on YouTube, but also on my Patreon. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you, and your support is always appreciated. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon, or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. my time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in hopefully a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.